Hey, how's it going? Steve here. So in the previous video, I've introduced you to the very powerful technique of layer masking, which allows you to selectively reveal or hide parts of a layer or layer adjustment. Now, I hope you've had a chance to experiment with that technique in between watching that video and this one. And if you have, and you've managed to get your head around layer masking in this way, then the really good news is that you already know how to blend multiple exposures manually as well. So what I'm going to do is run you through an example just to show you how you can transfer that knowledge and that skill across into image blending. But before I do that, I just want to explain for folks who haven't bracketed exposures and blended them together before, what it means and why it's a good thing. So the short version is that our camera sensors can only capture detail within a certain range of light values, and when a scene contains a lot of contrast between the darkest and brightest parts, that's when either our highlights blow out or our shadows become almost black. Now, in order to capture the full range of light, we need to take 2 or more shots, one exposed for the dark part and one for the bright part, and depending on how far apart these exposures are, we may need to take a number of in-between exposures as well. Now, if it is new to you, this is called bracketing, and your DSLR camera is going to have an option to do this, so that all you need to do is just click the shutter, say 3 or 5 times, and it's going to automatically adjust the exposure each time you click the shutter. Or alternatively, if you're comfortable changing the exposures manually, you can also do it that way. But coming up, I've just got an example where I've taken 3 exposures and I'm going to blend them together just using the simple layer masking techniques that I've shown you in the previous videos. So let's get on with it now. Okay, so for this example, I've already preloaded 3 different exposures into their own layer in Photoshop. And so what I've got is this dark exposure on top, where basically the only part of this image I'm interested in is the sky here, because that's the brightest part, and I just wanted to make sure that all the detail and color is there in that bright part of the sky. If I just hide this top layer now, you'll see like the middle exposure, which kind of has a little bit more detail around this middle area here, but those highlights in the sky have started to blow out. And if I just hide this middle layer here, then you've got like a really quite substantially brighter exposure kind of just at the bottom of the stack here. And obviously this is going to be good for the darkest parts, which are this kind of cliff face here with the mountain behind it, and just the foreground here with the pool. So to start blending these together into one good exposure, what I'm going to do first is just re-enable this middle layer, but I'm going to add a layer mask to it and then invert it. So I'm pressing on the Mac Command or Control on the PC and I on the keyboard, and that's just going to flip the layer mask and turn it black, which means it's covering up that layer completely. Now, quite simply, what I need to do is just get the white brush, and I'm going to go with a kind of, about 2/3 opacity, so about 66%. And I'll just zoom out because I find it easier to work on a smaller on a smaller scale here. And what I'm just going to do with the white brush, and remembering I'm on 0% hardness, I'm just going to start brushing around these parts of the image here where it's all kind of blown out and just looks completely white. So as I do that, you'll notice it starts to sort of come back, all that detail starts to come back. And what's actually happening as I do that is that the white being painted into the layer mask of this middle layer is causing that image in those areas to show through. So I can just toggle this middle layer off and on, and we'll see the difference that makes. And so what we have is, kind of like a semi-blended image as a result. Now, because this middle image doesn't have all of that detail in the sky there, it doesn't matter how much I kind of brush into the layer mask. These colors are never going to come back because they're not originally there in this exposure. So what I need to do just to bring that detail back in the sky there is now do the same thing with this darkest exposure. So I'm going to, I've just click the icon there to re-enable that. I'll add the layer mask, and again just invert it. So that basically the layer is active, but it's completely hidden by the mask. And again, I'm going to go a bit more subtly on the brush now, so around 30%. I'm just going to brush into that brightest white area there. And as I do that gradually, you start to see that color come back into that bright part of the sky there. I'm just going to kind of try and even out the brightness of that sky. And I think what I'll do as well, just go a bit lower on the opacity. Just come up here. Just maybe use the darker exposure to kind of, do the equivalent of dodging and burning, or in this case, burning the sort of the edges of this pool, just to bring more focus onto the bright part in the middle. And if I just toggle this off and on, you'll see the difference that layer makes now. So, this is without that top layer, and this is with. So, yeah, what that gives us is like a really nicely blended version of those three different bracketed exposures. To achieve this in camera would have been, well, it was literally impossible, because that brightness in the sky was just so bright, and compared to the darkness of these rocks here and the foreground of the pool, like I said, this is literally impossible in camera, unless you've got one of these new cameras that can shoot HDR, which pretty cool, but that's not what we're going for here. And so, just as a callback to the workflow portion of these last few videos, what we have now here is an image that is basically at the end of stage 2, which is getting that evened out exposure, so that it's our starting point for basically making all of the color and contrast adjustments and then embellishments in the later stages of the workflow. So this method of using a simple brush into the layer mask of bracketed exposures is a really excellent way to get started with manual blending, and it's really going to make such a big difference in your landscape images if you're not already doing it. So I really do want to encourage you to practice and start experimenting with it right away, and because the sooner you do, the sooner you're going to start getting good at it and seeing for yourself what can be achieved and the impact that it's going to have on your landscapes. Now, just one quick word of warning. This simple method is really, really great, but it does have some limitations and pitfalls, so I just want to give you a heads up on what I think is the biggest one before you get started. And what I'm talking about is when you have a lot of contrast between the hard edges in your shot. So for example, you're shooting towards a bright sky and there's a large dark rock right in front of it. Now, when you're in Photoshop with this image, you're going to want to brighten up that rock by blending in a brighter exposure. But when you do, you'll notice how difficult it is to brush right up to those edges of that rock without encroaching into the sky. And if you do encroach into the sky, what that's going to do is create like a halo effect around the rock. So it doesn't really matter whether you're blending exposures or using adjustment layers here to brighten that rock. The real problem is the inaccuracy of the brush strokes into the mask. To show you exactly what that looks like, I'm going to show you a clip from the first video of my luminosity masking video course. So I'll just quickly flip over to that video now. Now, as you can see, this very dark rock here is against a relatively bright sky. So in the instance that I wanted to brighten up this rock here and bring a bit more detail back into it, using the methods that I've already shown you previously, we might go about that by adding a curves layer and perhaps increasing the brightness like so. But as we can see, the whole image has been affected, so I would invert the layer mask to hide the effect, and then grab a white brush on a reasonably high opacity and basically start brushing into that area that I want to affect. Now, this is an excellent way to go about this, but if I zoom in a little bit to get really up close to those edges, then what's going to happen is that no matter how accurate I am when I'm doing these brush strokes, there's always going to be a risk of not getting all of the detail that I want to with this brush stroke. So for example, there's absolutely no way that I can get right up to those edges there without affecting the sky behind it. So if I just do this now, I'll go as close to those edges as I can just to show you what I mean. Because I haven't been able to go right up close to this edge here, that's still, the rock has got kind of like a dark shadow around the outside edge of it, which obviously isn't what we want. And if I zoom out, that looks okay. Excuse me, but I don't know if you notice up here, you can see it's just starting to create a bit of a halo effect where I've actually gone over the edge of the rock and started to affect the sky with my adjustment layer. Okay, so if I just press Alt or Option, click on the layer mask there, we can actually see what this mask looks like. Now, all of the white areas are the areas of the image that this layer adjustment is going to affect, and all of the black is the bit where the effect is hidden. Now, as you can see, that's not really an accurate layer mask. It's good, and it does a decent job, and in many ways, in many cases, you can actually be quite happy that this will give you the result that you want. But let me just show you now the difference between this and a luminosity mask. So I shall hide that layer there. And I've already created this before I started the video. Now, I have a curves layer here, and let me just click on this mask now to show you. Now, this mask has been created using a luminosity selection, and all of the white areas in this image here represent the darker portion of the photograph. And as you can see, it's a lot more detailed, it's a much more intricate mask, which means that when I deactivate that and just come back into this curves layer, if I was to grab this line here and start to increase the brightness of the adjustment, you can see what's happening. It's having the effect on the area that in the mask is represented as white, and everything that's black in the mask is, the curves adjustment is having no effect. So if I just hide that and re-enable it again, you can see exactly when I do the before and after. You can see exactly what's happening. So as you can imagine, this is a much more accurate way of creating a mask, and it gives you that level of detail that you're never going to get just by stroking with the brush into the image. Okay, pretty cool, I'm sure you'll agree. So if you want to jump ahead and check out the luminosity masking course, then just click the link below this video now. Now, I did just want to say that whilst luminosity masking does sound like a really complicated technique, it's actually reasonably easy to get to grips with. And if you've been able to get your head around what I've been teaching you in this recent set of videos about layer masking and whatnot, then I really think you'll be fine. So in the course, I'll teach you luminosity selections and masks from the ground up, including why and when to use them, and why they're so powerful. And in the final chapter, I'll also walk you through how I blended and processed these 5 original raw files into this awesome finished image. But if you're not yet ready to give luminosity masking a go, then you're still going to see some amazing results using the blending techniques that I've already shown you in this video. So I really want you to drop what you're doing and just give it a go. When you do come across that haloing problem when blending exposures without luminosity masks, then there are 2 main approaches that you can take to kind of get around it. The first one is to basically zoom in as close to those edges as possible and really get accurate with your mask and with your brush strokes. Whereas the other approach is kind of almost like going in the opposite direction and using just large soft brush strokes that don't really get too close to those edges. But it really doesn't matter which approach you use. The key really is just to keep an eye on those halos, and over time you will get good at it. So really the key is just to practice hard and keep an eye on those halos. Alright, that just about wraps this video up, so thanks very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video and are going to take these techniques and start using them if you haven't already started to do so. And please remember to leave a comment below this video if you have any questions, or if you want to give the luminosity masking course a go, then just click the link below the video now. Otherwise, thanks again, and I'll speak to you soon.